You meet someone, the conversation flows naturally. You laugh, you connect, and it genuinely feels like one of those rare moments where two people actually click. Then they walk away, and within 30 seconds, their name is completely gone. Not hiding somewhere in the back of your mind, just gone. And before you can even process what happened, a familiar voice inside your head says the same thing it always says. You are not paying attention. You just do not care enough. Something is wrong with you. Most people have quietly believed that about themselves for years, and most people are completely wrong. Here are 8 specific psychological reasons why your brain forgets names, and by the time you reach the last one, you will never feel the same way about this again. Cognitive researchers have spent decades studying exactly why names disappear the way they do, and what they found has nothing to do with rudeness, carelessness, or a lack of interest in other people. It turns out that names are uniquely and specifically difficult for the brain to hold on to, not because of a weakness in your memory, but because of the precise way human memory is actually built. Forgetting names is not a character flaw dressed up as a memory problem. It is a well-documented psychological phenomenon with a very specific explanation, and once you understand it, the embarrassment you've been carrying begins to look like something else entirely.
The first reason is that the brain does not treat names like other words. Someone introduces themselves at a work event. You smile, you shake hands, you hear the name clearly, and 60 seconds later it is gone. But you remember they work in finance. You remember they mentioned moving from another city. You remember the handshake was firm and confident. The name? Nothing. This is not random. Psychologist Deborah Burke at Pomona College found that names sit in an isolated corner of memory with almost no mental connections linking them to anything else, a pattern she identified as the proper noun effect. When you hear that someone is a nurse, your brain instantly links that word to hospitals, patients, long shifts, and care. It lands in a rich web of existing knowledge and sticks. But when you hear someone's name, your brain receives a sound with nothing attached to it. No story, no image, no meaning, just a label floating in empty space. Labels without meaning are the first things the brain releases. This is also what creates the tip of the tongue phenomenon, that maddening experience of knowing you know someone's name, feeling it right at the edge of your mind, and being completely unable to pull it forward. The name exists, the connection strong enough to retrieve it simply was not built.
The second reason is that you were not fully present the moment you heard it. You've just been introduced to someone at a party. You heard the name, you even repeated it quietly in your head, and the moment someone nearby said something louder, it was gone. Not because you stopped trying, because your brain was already doing 5 other things at once. Introductions are neurologically overwhelming. You are shaking someone's hand while simultaneously scanning their face, registering their tone of voice, managing the impression you are making, and preparing what you're about to say next. The name arrives in the middle of all of that, lasting less than 2 seconds in the air, and never receives the focused attention it needs to move from the moment into memory. Cognitive researchers call this attentional encoding. The brain can only store what it was genuinely attending to at the precise moment information arrived. Everything else gets quietly discarded. The name was never ignored, it simply never got through the door.
The third reason is that social pressure silently shuts down memory. Think about the last time you were introduced to someone who genuinely mattered, a potential employer, someone you deeply respected, a person you wanted to impress. You felt the pressure of that moment clearly. What you probably did not feel was your brain quietly redirecting almost all of its processing capacity toward managing that pressure, monitoring your posture, regulating your anxiety, choosing your words carefully, leaving almost nothing available for memory encoding. Researchers call this social cognitive overload. The more the moment matters to you, the less mental space remains for the name. If names disappear fastest in the moments that feel most important, that is not irony, that is your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. The fourth reason is that the brain was designed to remember faces, not names. You spot someone across the room at an event, you know with absolute certainty that you know them. You can picture exactly where you met, maybe even what you talked about. You walk over, smile, and you have no idea whatsoever what their name is. That is not a glitch. That is your brain working precisely as it was designed. Neuroscientist Nancy Canwisher at MIT identified an entire dedicated brain region for processing and recognizing faces, a structure called the fusiform face area. No equivalent region exists for names anywhere in the brain. For thousands of years, recognizing a familiar face meant safety or danger. Remembering a spoken label carried no survival value whatsoever. So when you recognize someone's face instantly while drawing a complete blank on their name, your brain is not malfunctioning. It is simply revealing exactly what it was built to prioritize long before names even existed. You were working with ancient hardware in a modern world, and the hardware is functioning perfectly. The fifth reason is that first impressions flood the brain with too much at once. You're standing in front of someone new. In the space of about 4 seconds, your brain has already begun processing their height, their energy, their eye contact, the way they carry themselves, and what your gut is telling you about them. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman found that first impressions consume a disproportionately large share of the brain's available processing capacity, drawing so heavily on its fast automatic system that the slower deliberate system, the one responsible for carefully encoding specific details like names, barely gets a chance to engage. His dual process theory showed that these two systems do not always cooperate cleanly. The name arrives during the exact moment of peak cognitive demand and falls straight through the gap. You were not distracted. You were overwhelmed by design. The sixth reason is that names have no meaning your brain can grip. She was wearing a gray coat. She mentioned she had just come back from Portland. She laughed at something you said and it was genuine. She told you her dog's name was Milo. You cannot tell me her name. This is semantic anchoring in action. The brain's tendency to hold on to information that connects to something it already understands and release what has no existing meaning to attach to. Her coat, her city, her laugh, her dog, all of those details linked instantly to things your brain already knew. Her name arrived as an isolated sound with no hook, no story, and no meaning underneath it. Your memory did not fail. It followed its own rules exactly. The seventh reason is that people who forget names are often paying attention to something more important. There's a certain kind of person who forgets your name within a minute of meeting you, but 3 weeks later, in a different conversation, quietly mentions something specific you said that you had already forgotten yourself. Their brain was not absent during that first introduction. It was already moving toward what it considered worth keeping. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi found that genuinely engaged minds naturally direct their deepest attention toward meaning rather than labels, a pattern he described as selective cognitive investment. The name was a label. What you said, how you said it, and what it revealed about you, that was the meaning. And meaning is what that kind of mind was built to catch. The eighth reason, the one researchers find most fascinating, is that forgetting names may reflect a specific and remarkable kind of intelligence. And if you've spent years quietly feeling embarrassed about this is the one you'll want to hear. Psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman, whose research into creative cognition has reshaped how scientists understand different forms of intelligence, identified what he calls a diffuse thinking pattern, a cognitive style where the brain naturally resists narrow, detail-focused encoding in favor of broader, more associative processing. People with this thinking style do not lock tightly onto isolated fragments of information like names. Instead, their minds move fluidly across ideas, connections, patterns, and possibilities, building a richer, wider picture of the world at the expense of precise, surface-level detail. His work connects directly to research on default mode network activation, findings showing that highly creative and conceptually intelligent individuals show stronger activity in the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for imagination, big picture thinking, and the kind of deep associative reasoning that narrow focused attention tends to shut down. In simple terms, the brain that struggles to hold on to a single spoken label is very often the same brain that sees connections others miss, thinks in ways that go beyond the obvious, and remembers the things about people that actually matter long after everyone else has moved on. So here is what all 8 of these reasons point to. Forgetting a name was never about caring less. It was never about being rude, inattentive, or socially careless. It was about having a brain that moves toward meaning, that prioritizes depth over detail, connection over cataloging, and the substance of a moment over its label. That is not a flaw. That is a cognitive signature. And once you understand what it actually is, the quiet embarrassment of those blank moments begins to look completely different. The next time a name disappears the moment after you hear it, you will know what was actually happening. Your brain was not absent. It was simply somewhere it considered more important. Which of these 8 reasons felt most true to your own experience? Leave the number in the comments. I read every one. If this gave you a new way of understanding something you have felt quietly embarrassed about, send it to someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want psychology that genuinely changes the way you see yourself, subscribe. Every video takes something you have quietly wondered about yourself and shows you what the science actually says about it. That is what this channel is here for. See you in the next one.